Imagine a young, simple, orphan girl from a despised people living in a foreign land. Suddenly, she is torn from her ordinary routine and thrown into a luxurious palace, surrounded by intrigue, betrayal, and deadly danger. The fate of an entire nation would depend on her words. But what if she failed? The story of Esther is one of the most fascinating in the Bible. A plot worthy of a great epic film, a powerful and unpredictable king, a deposed queen, a royal contest, a cruel villain, and a young woman who must risk everything to save her people from destruction. But who was Esther really? What does the Bible reveal about her that many fail to realize? And what lessons can this story bring to your life today? Get ready to delve into the true story of Queen Esther and discover mysteries, hidden details, and powerful lessons that can transform your faith. To understand the story of Esther, we must first visualize the setting in which it all happened. It is the 5th century BC, in the mighty Persian Empire, one of the largest in history. King Xerxes, also known as Xerxes I, ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. His capital was Susa, an opulent city full of wealth. Ahasuerus was an authoritarian and extravagant monarch. He organized great banquets, parties that lasted months with exotic foods, unlimited wines, and displays of power. It was at one of these parties that a shocking event occurred. Queen Vashti, Ahasuerus' wife, disobeyed the king in public. At the height of the festivities, Ahasuerus ordered Vashti to appear before everyone to display her beauty. But to everyone's surprise, she refused. This was seen as an unacceptable insult to the king and to all the men of the empire. As a result, Vashti was banished from the palace and stripped of her position. Now the throne was empty, and the king needed a new queen. This decision set in motion a series of events that would change Jewish history forever. Long before she became queen, Esther was just an ordinary young woman. Her real name was Hadassah, and she belonged to the Jewish people, a minority group living as foreigners in Persia. Esther was an orphan. Her parents had died when she was still a child, and she was raised by her cousin Mordecai, a righteous and God-fearing man who worked at the royal palace gate. Mordecai taught Esther to keep her faith, but also to be wise and discreet. The name Esther has a special meaning. It comes from the Persian setareh, meaning star, but it may also be related to the Hebrew word seter, meaning hidden or concealed. This meaning would become prophetic, as Esther would need to hide her Jewish identity in order to survive in the royal palace. But Esther's destiny was about to change drastically. With Queen Vashti banished, King Ahasuerus ordered his officials to bring the most beautiful women in the empire to a royal contest. The goal? To choose the new queen. This was no ordinary contest. The selected young women underwent a long preparation process. For 12 months, they were subjected to intense beauty treatments, baths with aromatic oils, massages with myrrh, and exotic perfumes. Among all those chosen, Esther stood out. But it was not only for her beauty. She possessed a grace and wisdom that attracted attention. Even without revealing her Jewish identity, Esther won the favor of everyone around her, including the eunuch Haggai, in charge of the royal harem. When the time came for her to present herself to the king, Ahasuerus was enchanted by her. He did not hesitate. He placed the crown on her head and made her queen of Persia. From an unknown orphan to the queen of the greatest empire of the time. But Esther's true purpose had yet to be revealed. While Esther was settling into life in the palace, something dark was happening behind the scenes. A man named Haman, one of the king's most powerful officials, began to plot an evil plan. Haman was proud and arrogant. He demanded that everyone bow down to him as a sign of respect. But one man refused to do so, Mordecai, Esther's cousin. Mordecai, being a Jew, knew that he should only bow down to God. This infuriated Haman, who decided not only to take revenge on Mordecai, but to exterminate all Jewish people in the empire. Haman cunningly convinced King Ahasuerus to sign a decree condemning all Jews to death. The date for the massacre was set. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, the enemies of the Jews could attack them and seize their possessions. God's people were doomed to destruction, and only one person could stop it. When Mordecai heard of the decree, he tore his clothes in mourning and sent an urgent message to Esther. Do not think that you will escape into the palace while all the Jews are being killed. And who knows if you have not been made queen for this very moment. Esther 4 verses 13 to 14. Esther faced the greatest dilemma of her life. She could remain silent and try to save herself or risk everything to save her people. But there was one problem. No one could approach the king without being summoned. Anyone who entered Ahasuerus' presence without permission could be killed. Even so, Esther made a decision. She would fast for 3 days and then present herself to the king, even if it meant her death. The crucial moment arrived. Esther put on her royal robes and entered the throne room. Her heart was pounding. Would the king look favorably on her or order her execution? When Ahasuerus saw her, something unexpected happened. He welcomed her with favor and held out his golden scepter, allowing her to speak. Esther wisely did not reveal the problem right away. Instead, he invited the king and Haman to a banquet. During the banquet, Ahasuerus asked what Esther had requested. She asked them to return the next day for another banquet. The suspense was in the air. Little did Haman know that his luck was about to change forever. That night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep. He had the royal records read and discovered something surprising. Mordecai had saved his life in the past, but he had never been rewarded. The next morning, Haman went to the king to ask for Mordecai's execution, but before he could speak, Ahasuerus surprised him. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Thinking the king was talking about him, Haman suggested a great honor. To his humiliation, Ahasuerus ordered Haman to grant this honor to Mordecai. At the second banquet, Esther finally revealed her identity and denounced Haman before the king. Enraged, Ahasuerus sentenced Haman to the same gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The decree against the Jews was reversed, and God's people were saved. The victory of the Jews over their enemies was not just a momentary deliverance. It was a milestone in the history of God's people and resulted in the creation of a celebration that endures to this day, the festival of Purim. But how did this happen? Even with Haman dead, the royal decree that allowed the massacre of the Jews was still in effect. According to Persian law, an order from the king could not be revoked. However, Ahasuerus allowed Esther and Mordecai to create a new decree. This new decree gave the Jews the right to defend themselves against any attack. When the day set for the massacre arrived, the Jews not only survived, but defeated their enemies. The impact of this event was so great that Mordecai and Esther decreed that this day should be remembered forever. Thus was born Purim, a festival of celebration and gratitude to God for his miraculous deliverance. To this day, Jews celebrate Purim with joy, banquets, gift-giving, and readings from the book of Esther. It is a reminder that God can turn any situation around, even when all seems lost. The story of Esther is much more than a tale of a courageous queen. It is full of spiritual lessons that we can apply to our lives today. 1. God works behind the scenes. Interestingly, God's name does not appear at any point in the book of Esther. But that does not mean that he was not acting. Quite the contrary. Every detail from Esther's choice to Haman's downfall shows how God directs events to fulfill his plans. This teaches us that even when we cannot see God acting, he is in control. Maybe you are going through a difficult time and do not understand what is happening. But remember, God never loses control of history. 2. Courage to make a difference. Esther could have remained silent. She could have chosen to save herself and ignore the suffering of her people. But she decided to risk everything for a greater cause. How often does God put us in situations where we need to be courageous? Maybe it's at work, in our family, or in society. Esther teaches us that even when we are afraid, we must trust in God and act in faith. If I perish, I perish. Esther 4 verse 16. 3. The power of fasting and prayer. Before facing the king, Esther asked her people to fast for 3 days. This was a moment of intense seeking for God, demonstrating total dependence on him. This reminds us that when faced with difficulties, we must seek God seriously. Fasting and prayer not only change circumstances, but also strengthen our faith and prepare us for challenges. For God uses ordinary people to accomplish his purposes. Esther was not rich, famous, or powerful when she was chosen to be queen. However, God placed her in that position for a greater purpose. How often do we think we are not good enough to be used by God? But the story of Esther reminds us that he uses the most unlikely people to do extraordinary things. And who knows if you have been made queen for this time? Esther 4 verse 14. If you are alive today, it is because God has a purpose for your life. After all that happened, what became of Esther and Mordecai? Mordecai was greatly honored by King Xerxes and given a prominent position in the kingdom, becoming the prime minister of Persia. He continued to be a wise and God-fearing leader, helping to rule with justice. Esther, on the other hand, remained queen. The Bible doesn't give us many details about the following years of her life, but we know that she was a woman who left her mark on history forever. The story of Esther is not just an old story. It is a powerful reminder that God can use anyone to fulfill his plans. You may be facing challenges, but God has a greater purpose for your life. You may be in a difficult position, but your faith and courage can change history. You may not see God acting now, but he has never stopped being in control. Just like Esther, you may be called to act at a crucial moment. The question is, will you have the courage to say yes to God's call? If this story spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear this message.